Good evening and welcome to the Kim B. Davis Show. I'm your host, Kim B. Davis, and this evening we're going to be talking about America's love affair with guns. And this evening we have one of our most special guests. We have Shanay Watson-Whittaker. She is our political strategist and organizer. Good evening, Shanay. How are you?
Good evening, Kim. I am okay. How about you today?
I am great, despite all that is happening in our country. So let's get right to it.
Yes.
On May 24th, 2022, we had an 18-year-old young man walking to Robb Elementary in Uvalde, Texas, and murder 19 babies,
Hmm.
7 to 10 years of age, two teachers. Since then, nationally, we have had 20 mass shootings since Uvalde, and that was May 24th. It is June 8th. In here in southeastern Michigan, I understand there were several mass shootings over the weekend, but I believe nationally again, 13. They range from graduation parties to malls to backyard barbecues to just people in a neighborhood.
Hmm.
Shanae, I don't know about you, but I don't understand what's happening. Can you talk to us about why we are here, and then I want to go into the Second Amendment on our next question.
You know, just thinking about the tragedies that happened in Uvalde and also in Buffalo the week prior to that, we just live in a society that just uplifts violence, and talking is like out of the question. Is it's just go right to it. Both of those tragedies, I think they were fueled by hate. There's an anger, there's a distrust in society, and to think that again we fit, it's like guns are the only way to resolve conflict. I take it back to the lack of critical thinking skills, the extremism that's accessible to everyone, specifically young people who are still, at 18 years old, 19 years old, you're still like learning and developing. Your brain is still developing. There's an attraction to that, and in the sense of power. And also, we live in a society where it's uplifted. Gun ownership. My family owns guns,
Mm-hmm.
and at the same time, we know that that's the not the only way to handle a dispute. But for a lot of Americans, in that frame of mind, that's the only way they can handle situations. It's unnerving, it's scary, it's frightening, but it's also not brand new. This has gone on for quite some time. With gun control started really because of the Black Panther Party arming themselves. But at the same time, there has been a, a, a purposeful attempt to normalize gun usage, and in actually uh, guns that are military grade with the white supremacist movement as well.
Thank you, Shanae, for giving us all those details and breaking that down. You're absolutely correct. Gun regulation did not start until the Black Panthers began to arm themselves and protecting their community with many of the same issues that we see today with police violence and police brutality and other issues. I want to read what the Second Amendment says. It says, and this is in brief, a well regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So, Shanae, would I be wrong to say, but isn't that in terms of if someone's coming to invade, if that is, a foreign occupier or something, is that our neighbor? Would our neighbor be included in that? And the reason I'm asking you, because I know you do a lot of work with the Supreme Court and you've been working with the courts, especially around Roe v. Wade. And so I want to sort of get your take on what you think that connection is.
I think that we have judges and elected officials who've twisted the Second Amendment. Again, this was to prevent this creation of the Second Amendment was in response to the British
Mm-hmm.
coming into the homes of then uh, colonists and inhabiting their homes and seizing their homes. So
Mm-hmm.
the militia was actually developed to resist against the British Army when they were here. I think people have taken advantage of the Second Amendment. I would say one side has again like aligned itself with the white supremacist movement and tapped into insecurity about power, about control within that segment of society, and they're well funded.
Mm-hmm.
And the other side, and I can say this, is lax on it and more
Mm-hmm.
responsive rather than, excuse me, reactive rather than responding and even being proactive with this. We live in a society again that just is based on violence and glorifies by violence. And when you have the normalization of these groups, these militia groups that were really bands of people who are frustrated because they're losing power and they believe in this replacement theory, there's a segment that's going to take advantage of it. I tell people racism and white supremacy is $1 billion business, and the
Yes.
NRA makes millions and millions of dollars. Politicians who align themselves with that, they make millions of dollars on their campaigns. Their private investments are aligned with that as well. So they're going to continue to do what they can to keep themselves in power, and that would include exploiting fear of people who feel like they're losing power, although they're looking at the wrong people.
Again, thank you. So, Shanae, you brought up something, and many people may know what the great replacement theory is, but can you give us an actual definition so we can educate our listeners?
Well, I'm just going to paraphrase and say the theory is that there are people who are minorities, religious minorities, and ethnic minorities that have been brought here to replace American white people, and to replace them with people of color. So that's basically what it is. It's based on a theory that's non existent, even though this theory goes back to the end of slavery. It is. It really is just that old.
Mm-hmm.
That plays into white fear of minorities doing what was been done to them,
Right.
including black folks, now black and brown folk
Mm-hmm.
here in America, and that's what's been plaguing these groups and these young people who have participated in these mass shootings. With the shooter with in Buffalo, he had a whole manifesto based on that, and people who agree or are aligned with those values, they call him mentally ill because again, it's the typical response out of that population. Instead of investigating why is a young person so concerned with the replacement theory, instead he should be worrying about college and exploring, you know, his career options. Instead he went and found the blackest region in the state of New York and purposely targeted a supermarket where the most vulnerable citizens go to, mostly seasoned saints and families go to, and
Mm-hmm.
they're not armed. So he did that intentionally. What happened in Uvalde, that person intentionally went after children, the most vulnerable of our population, and killed teachers on top of that. There is something absolutely wrong with our society that uplifts this kind of behavior. And even what happened in Philly with that violence at the
Mm-hmm.
Roots picnic, it's all
Mm-hmm.
endemic, and it goes, the root cause is the glorification of violence in our society, and it's money making opportunity for a lot of people.
Right. And unfortunately, if there is money to be made, people will make it. Okay, so I was going to Buffalo. Thank you for bringing that up. So I want to go back to a couple of things that you said. You talked about hatred being endemic. You talked about the great replacement theory. Shanae, what is it? Because when the mass shooting happened in Buffalo, we didn't see the outpouring of support and sympathy that we see in Uvalde. And I don't want to compare the two, but the other issue that I see, and I want you to sort of abridge both of these. Matthew McConaughey was at the White House today or yesterday, and he gave a very passionate speech from the briefing room talking about how this young girl's green Converse shoes, which had a bullet hole in them, were the only thing that was used to identify her. And he said, if we can't agree on anything, you mentioned seasoned saints. And for those that don't know, seasoned saints are our elders. And in the African American community, the Black community, we revere our older people. They are what we refer to as libraries. They are wisdom. They are the backbones of our community. And so you're talking about on a Sunday afternoon where many people are coming from church. There's a story of a woman who had just left a facility where her husband was housed, and she was going to get dinner so she could go home. These were ordinary people
Mm-hmm.
that you would see anywhere in America, and they were doing what everyday ordinary Americans do, which is go to the grocery store. Shanae, talk a little bit about the difference in how, when it seems like it's black and brown, because I've heard the same thing with Sandy Hook, that, oh, that wasn't real. They made that up. We know in Michigan we have Oxford, and they're still trying to navigate that entire situation. And that young man, from what I understand, is concerned about his fan mail. And so when we talk about hate, it is indeed endemic. It is a glorification of violence. But I don't even know if it's just that. If it's not just hate and evil. Share your thoughts, Shanae.
I think that I, I I would say there is an element of evil, but I'm not the one to put that out there, directly, because each situation is different. With Buffalo, again, these are seasoned saints. I think that there was a level of sympathy towards the community, but it wasn't as responsive as Uvalde. But
Mm-hmm.
with Uvalde, it was also the ineptitude of the police there,
Yes.
the cover up of the facts, the changing stories of the police department, and the politics there as well. It is an election year in Texas. That is a hot election. The gubernatorial race there,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and in New York, it was more targeted. I think that since we do have a manifesto, that there is the why, whereas Uvalde wasn't. There isn't a why quite yet. And again, the police keep changing their stories, but how they treated the parents when the parents were trying to go in as well, that's also a factor. And then their party politics, their local politics, and threatening a parent with prison time if she
Mm-hmm.
spoke out again about what happened, how she rescued her own children, and their response time was 90 upwards of 90 minutes to
Wow.
get inside compared to Buffalo. So those are the two. I think those are the glaring differences between the two cases, where we didn't have that kind of ineptitude in
Mm-hmm.
Buffalo that we saw in Texas, and also the politicization of the event in Uvalde compared to Buffalo, where it wasn't as politicized. I think that's the difference between both. What I'll say that what's a common thread, I think, for many of these people on the other side that are against gun control. I'm just gonna say it out and make it plain.
Mm-hmm.
They're calamities. These victims are calamities in their cause. Again, this is a money making business. This is about maintaining and increasing power and wealth for the very few at the expense of all of us. And even in divisions, the racial division, ethnic division, the socioeconomic division, and education division between a lot of our citizens in our country is being exploited by those few who want to remain in power. And again, the victims, the perpetrators, they're all part of that one system that there very few people want to let go of, because if they feel that there's any inch to give when it comes to any kind of gun control, that they're going to lose a considerable amount of power. It's not about the safety of us as individuals, it's about maintaining power. And until people realize that we're going to play the same looped game,
Mm-hmm.
thoughts and prayers. It's too early to start talking about gun control. Let's not politicize this event. Let's let the families grieve and then let's decide. But by the time the families are, quote, finishing grieving, which never happens,
Right.
they move on to the next event. And that's what the few in power want us to forget. It
Mm-hmm.
happened in Sandy Hook, and those parents are out there protesting every day. The March for Our Lives, folks. There's an event, a nationwide event this week on June 11th.
Mm-hmm.
So it's happened after the Pulse nightclub shooting, as well. That it's the same loop that we've played over and over and over again and again. So few people in power, they're not willing to move at any cost to maintain the power that they already have.
Wow, that's a lot. Um, and I absolutely agree with you. This is about power. It's nothing more than that. Because anytime you can make the excuse of, we need to let people grieve. We've been doing this since Columbine. And the children who went through Columbine are now adults raising children. And I would have to imagine that they are in shock, awe, and horror that one, something that happened to their school is now the national stage for every mass shooting, where now we do shooter drills, all of these things to prepare, because essentially they are the blueprint. Now, Shanay, I know I asked you earlier about the Second Amendment, but I want to ask you a little bit more because, and I forget the exact quote, but Ben Franklin, who was one of our founding fathers, he talks about when we give up our freedoms, that we really aren't free. What do you think that the founding fathers, if they were here right now, because people love to quote the founding fathers, what the founding fathers said, do you think that the founding fathers, outside of what the original intent, what you said earlier, what do you think that they would say about people carrying guns the way that we do?
I think that we laughed at by these folks that are controlling the message, and that part of that fragment of our population. There was a different time back then. Back then, there was slavery. Back then,
Yes.
only people who are homeowners property owners could vote. Back then, women couldn't vote.
Mm-hmm.
There was a tiered system of equality there. So I don't think it would apply. Those of Franklin Roosevelt, Ben Franklin's quote. I got the two
Yes.
mixed up. Ben Franklin's quote about, if you given up, I'm paraphrasing,
Mm-hmm.
liberty for freedom, you don't deserve either.
Yes.
This doesn't apply. This is just, let's talk about common sense, and the AR-15s in the hands of children.
Yes.
This is crazy. That young person in Buffalo stacked his money, and he actually had like a payment plan, like almost got the gun on credit. That's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
What
Mm-hmm.
happened in Uvalde with that young man shooting his grandmother and then going ahead
Mm-hmm.
and shooting these children and getting access. These guns are expensive. An
Yes.
AR-15 is expensive.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have money to get
Mm-hmm.
that, and to get the munition that they had, like thousands of dollars in munition and bullets.
Mm-hmm.
That's money. These
Mm-hmm.
kids aren't starving. Obviously, I can say that both perpetrators aren't
Mm-hmm.
starving. They weren't starving for anything. The person in Buffalo, his parents were engineers. And the person in Uvalde, he lived with his grandmother, but his parents were obviously there for him.
Mm-hmm.
There's just something wrong, and there's a targeting again of young people, young men, uh, out there. It's purposeful, even in the gaming industry, that
Mm-hmm.
they're targeted. Incels, that's what they call them. Involuntarily celibate young men
Mm-hmm.
that are just full of rage and hate, and they just need to take it out on somebody. And it seems to be that in these instances that these young people take it out on the most vulnerable, like the children in Uvalde, and like those victims in Buffalo, and many of them were seasoned saints coming home from church or
Mm-hmm.
doing the Sunday dinner like we do in our community, having a big
Mm-hmm.
Sunday dinner and cooking and baking and getting those supplies.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, a couple more questions. What? Why do you think, Shanay, as a political expert, why are we having such a hard time saying that an 18-year-old should not be given the privilege to have an assault rifle? You can't drink. Why?
Right,
Why?
right.
Why do you think?
Again, it's about power. The folks in these extremists, and I wouldn't even call them gun rights because they're not gun rights.
Mm-hmm.
These extremist organizations feel like if they give even 1 inch, that all is lost,
Mm-hmm.
and they will not give an inch. Unlike the other side, it seems like they want to compromise more, but you can't compromise with somebody who's not willing to compromise. These
Mm-hmm.
people are not willing to compromise, and again, this is their collateral damage. These people, the victims, are collateral damage for a movement, a feeling, a money making business that doesn't give two darns, or like my daughter says, a flying milkshake about the everyday people who are impacted by gun violence.
Mm-hmm.
No child, and yes, these two people were children, no child should have access to an AR 15.
Mm-hmm.
That is a military assault um, weapon,
Mm-hmm.
military grade weapon. I can see if the person was in the service in active duty, they have that. And even then, they have to go through standardized some kind of checks, background checks, psychological tests to be in the armed forces.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, you have these people who right off the street can go buy these things and then use it and kill people, and then everybody makes excuses and calls it mental illness because
Mm-hmm.
that's a way of just relieving yourself of culpability instead of saying, well, daggone it, there's something wrong here. Why are these young men who could be productive citizens if they had the if people invested in them, instead of ensuring that they have access to these dangerous weapons? And at the end of the day, it seems like people just don't care. Those folks on the other side, they don't care. They don't care about the folks, the babies at Sandy Hook. They don't care about the babies in Uvalde. They don't care about the victims in Buffalo. One child was struck in Buffalo, and the
Mm-hmm.
mom today was testifying in front of Congress that the baby's 10 years old has shrapnel in his back, and he'll live with that. He had a hole in his neck, and he has to live with that for the rest of his life. That's crazy because
Mm-hmm.
somebody hated the his skin color.
Mm-hmm.
That's just crazy. A baby,
Mm-hmm.
a black
Mm-hmm.
baby,
Mm-hmm.
that could be your
Mm-hmm.
son or mine.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just going to go in one ear out the other with this Senate Republicans and even the House Republicans. They don't care. They really don't care. They don't care. We're not learning. And again, it's like a cycle. And these victims are collateral damage to the gun industry and to those politicians who take advantage of people who are full of fear and
Mm-hmm.
insecure.
Mm-hmm. So, Shanae, I want to ask you the $1 million question. So, today, I haven't seen it, but I heard about it. Rittenhouse, Kyle Rittenhouse, mass murderer, posted a video with his AR 15 or his assault rifles and said, Joe, you can't have our guns. Shanae, what do you think is the solution? Is there a solution?
The solution is for Congress to act, but there's only one side that wants to act. The other side is not. The only thing people can do is in those states where there is an election where you can actually get people who are friendly to change to vote them in. Otherwise, it's just we're just going to be at a stalemate. And even on a state level, you have to elect people who represent your values. If you
Mm-hmm.
don't participate and you don't vote and you yell from the sidelines and then you wonder why this is happening over and over again, that's on us as citizens. We're supposed to vote. That is our obligation. And if we care about the future of this country, we have to take responsibility on our behalf to move forward and to support people and to elect people who want substantial change. It's too much. It really is, and it's mind-boggling to me that this is happening over and over and over and again, and no one is moving, and no one is on the other side, and they're not willing to give anything, nothing at all, really
Mm-hmm.
not.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't care because again their bottom line is to make money and is to stay in power.
And it is very, very frustrating to have conversations and to listen to people make excuse after excuse after excuse. Yet we continue to see the same behavior. And at a certain point, it has to stop.
It's insanity, expecting you
Mm-hmm.
do the same thing over and over and over again and expect different results. You're not going to
Mm-hmm.
get the different results because those people who are in power, we keep electing the same people.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, they represent somebody's values, and the
Right.
electorate that supports them, they don't want gun control.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Which is scary because you're like, oh, these are my neighbors, these are my coworkers, these are people I go to church with or worship with or whatever it is you bowl with on Thursday. These are those people.
Yes.
So, Shanay, I know it's a busy year, 2022. It's an election year, midterms, all of those good things that are happening right now. And we see movement across the country with different elections. Can you give us an update on what's happening with the Supreme Court? And I know that a draft was leaked of an opinion about Roe v. Wade and stating that it was to be overturned. Can you give us an update on where we are and when we should expect the final Supreme Court decision?
Yes, we are awaiting the decision for the Dobbs v. Jackson, that is the Mississippi abortion ban case,
Mm-hmm.
to come down. It should come down any day now. Specifically, the Supreme Court usually releases their decisions on Mondays, because they have like such a backlog, 30 cases that they've adjudicated. They released one opinion today, so they might have other days in addition to the normal Monday schedule to release decisions. And what's going on with the SCOTUS leak? That was Judge Alito's opinion,
Mm-hmm.
along with Clarence Thomas agreeing with that. We don't know if that's the actual opinion, but from what we've seen so far, Supreme, Justice Alito is relying heavily on an opinion from the 1700s
Mm-hmm.
to basically state that a roe should be tossed, and that would set us back to a time where abortion would happen in back alleys and people would be placed at risk. But it also his leak also puts a few things in jeopardy. That would include gay marriage as well. That would include access to contraception. That would include interracial marriage. Uh, so those are the things that we have to think about. There's a domino effect with these people. They are extremists on that end, and people have to understand that what's at stake. This has been a 50-year battle on the other side, and what they plan on doing. There are theocrats on the Supreme Court. They are now the majority, and it's scary where they're going to take us. Yesterday, they had a ruling, and I forgot the case, where people, well, actually, yeah, it was yesterday. It was today that there was a ruling today that basically said that you couldn't sue the federal government
Mm.
for damages, and they would overturn a decision from Blevins, and that's very scary for for the American people if you are harassed and beat up by our federal authorities. So
Mm-hmm.
that's something to worry about as well. And then there are other cases that they adjudicated and sent out decisions that one of them was a person that actually was innocent. Uh, and new evidence came out that they still could be placed held in prison regardless of the new evidence that comes to clear them. It's
Mm-hmm.
just a number of decisions that are coming out that are anti-ethical and just morally wrong
Mm-hmm.
for us in society, and I hope people brace for what's going to happen. There are states here, if Roe is overturned, that have trigger bans, and also there are states that have pre decision bans that would go into effect. Places like Mississippi, Oklahoma, Missouri, all along the Bible Belt of the South that basically outlaws and bans abortions, even to the point of fertilization in
Mm-hmm.
some cases. Here in Michigan, we have a 1931 abortion law, a ban law that would incarcerate providers for providing abortion services, and those abortives would include Plan B as
Mm-hmm.
well.
Mm-hmm.
And then we do have people in the legislature that are extremists at this time that want to stop the injunction that's been in place
Mm-hmm.
from a circuit court here in Michigan. I was going to call us
Mm-hmm.
Mississippi.
It
that
feels like it
that
sometimes.
would right that injunction actually puts a hold on that
Mm-hmm.
1931 law
Mm-hmm.
until it's being seen by the state supreme court. So it's just a lot of moving parts at the same time. But I want people to be aware. I think that once that decision comes out, I don't think it's going to. I think it's going to overturn Roe. The severity, I don't give a stuff, and if it's not, if it's just 15 weeks or anything, there's a severity there that if you push it back to the states, that there are going to be few places and few hubs for people to have access to reproductive care, and it would be along the coastal states, Illinois here in the Midwest, and then in the West Coast states. That means people who are poor will not have access to reproductive care.
Mm-hmm.
People who are victims of any kind of abuse or rape or anything like that,
Mm-hmm.
might be feared of being prosecuted in states like
Mm-hmm.
Texas and Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
So there are so many triggers and so much that's going on. And once the decision comes down, a lot of people who haven't been paying attention will finally pay attention, but it will be a little too late.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you. Shanay, talk to us a little bit because I've been hearing about women who miscarry. And some states, I understand, have tried to go after women legally, stating that you aborted your child. The body does a natural thing. As women, we know that sometimes pregnancies aren't viable for whatever reason, and things can happen all the way up until that child is delivered.
Yes.
Can you talk about how the overturning of Roe v. Wade would affect women who miscarry or under natural conditions?
You would have to prove that you miscarry. That's
How do you do
unbelievable.
that?
How do you do that? You can't prove
Mm-hmm.
it. You
Mm-hmm.
cannot prove it.
Mm-hmm.
And there was two cases in California in a red county. There was actually a DA that went up for election yesterday and that
Mm-hmm.
lost because number one, he prosecuted two women out there for miscarrying,
Mm-hmm.
and because it was alleged that they aborted their children, quote, but it miscarried. And then also in Texas, in Harris County, that's Houston area, there was a woman, a Latina, that was prosecuted and charged because she went over to Mexico and got a Plan B, and then had some issues, side effect issues, and she went to the hospital, and a nurse reported her. And in Oklahoma, Native women are being targeted and prosecuted. One was sent to jail because they had miscarried, but according to the Oklahoma DA's office and the state, that she terminated her pregnancy. And I just want to say this: women of color, specifically Black women, will be targeted.
Mm-hmm.
And there are studies that show that women who and people who have been persecuted have been overwhelmingly women of color and people
Mm-hmm.
of color. And of those people of color, a majority of those prosecuted are Black women, Black people. And again, they will be made the face of the other side because of the politicization of that, and also white supremacy as well.
Mm-hmm.
That's $1 billion business, as I like to say, along with the gun business. It's all one. It's all one piece of the same pie, and we will be people who look like us that will be most at risk for incarceration in states, specifically in the South, like places like Mississippi, where it's 40% Black,
Mm-hmm.
um, Oklahoma, Texas, Louisiana already, which has a Democratic governor. Those are the people that will be at risk the most for prosecution.
Thank you for that, Shanae. One last question. This is a political question, and maybe you can give an answer. I haven't really heard a lot. So, Jenny Thomas Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas's wife, has been accused of sending text messages during the January 6th insurrection. Have we heard anything about that? Because I'm wondering if that's going to impact the Supreme Court. If Supreme Court Justice Thomas is going to have to step down.
He's not going to step down. Let's just make it plain.
Mm-hmm.
Those people, again, they have an agenda. They will move that agenda forward at all costs. I think that people need to pay attention to the January 6th committee hearings that will be coming out
Mm-hmm.
soon, and see where it takes us. From what we know, Jenny Thomas had a hand in organizing those events that led up to this insurrection, and we'll see what happens there. I don't have any evidence at this time, but I do know from what we do know in media stories is that she was one of the organizers of the event, and I'm sure she spoke with her husband throughout the time to see where he stood, because your husband and wife, you have those natural conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And he talked about in the past, Justice Thomas has talked about how influential his wife is to him and his decision making. So I'd expect more information to come out regarding Ginny Thomas and in her relationship with Justice Clarence Thomas. But I don't expect him to resign. I think that people don't have the wherewithal to push him to resign, and plus he won't resign because of the things that he needs to do to
Mm-hmm.
move forward, and his agenda and her agenda as well, to fulfill their goals of a more conservative uh, country, or and a
Mm-hmm.
more Christian based theocratic country.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'd say white supremacist Christian country, because
Yes.
black Christianity is different sect.
Yes, it is. We are very forgiving people, and if we got to the point where we behaved as they did, ooh, buddy, watch out, because this would be a terrible place to live.
Correct.
I want to close on this note. This feels, and I don't know what this feels like because obviously I wasn't alive, but in the 1700s, when you had the persecution of witches and witch trials and all this hysteria over who's doing what to whom, it feels like we've stepped back into the dark ages where people are just making stuff up. And I know Bible and I know you know Bible. And I always tell people, I said, there's a scripture that Jesus gives before he goes to the cross. And he says, the poor will always be with you, but you won't always have me. There is no place in the Bible where Jesus didn't tell people you're not supposed to feed, clothe, or take care of widows, orphans, children, anybody who needs help. He also says that if you're going around trying to share my word with people, but you aren't feeding people and they're hungry or they need clothing or they need shelter, then you aren't from me. You're from something else. And so when people talk about having faith, I'm like, faith without works is dead. You cannot just claim to have faith, because on that day of judgment, which all Christians are supposed to believe in, Jesus is going to say, I did not know you. Go somewhere. Thank you, Shanay,
Thank
for
you.
coming on and sharing with us and giving us our political update. You are our expert and we appreciate you. Tell us what you have coming up and tell us how we can reach you.
Thank you so much, Kim. What I have coming up is, what's going on with this
Mm-hmm.
Supreme Court once Dobbs decision comes down. I am going to have a Twitter space for people to come and talk about next steps. Hopefully, organize around people who share similar values nationwide, and also talk about the ways that we can make this place better for all of us. And you can find me on Twitter at lafemme_negrita on Twitter, and that's where I'm at.
Thank you, Shanay. Again, we appreciate you coming on, giving
Thank you.
us an update and breaking down this crazy love affair that Americans have with guns. It is really a $1 billion business, as you said, racism and the gun industry, and the victims of gun violence are simply that. They are collateral damage, and that is a sin and a shame upon this country. Hopefully, at some point, we will realize that and try and do better.
Mm-hmm. I hope so too. I'm going to stay optimistic. That's all I can hold on to.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for tuning in. You know that you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, LinkedIn, everywhere on social media. And it's Kimberly Batchelor Davis. Bachelor is spelled BATCHELOR. You can see this show on youtube.com/Kimberly Batchelor Davis. You can hear this show on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Google, and Wisdom. Thank you again for tuning in. I hope you will join us on our next episode. And as always, remember, be magnificent.